Today, we're looking at Robert Oster's Red Orange. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Robert Oster's Red Orange is a red with some orange to it. Mostly red. Mostly. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples, I put the ink into a different pen for a day, I then put it into a Noodler's Nib Creeper to take my notes for this video. Now before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this pink, definitely its own pink, across the bottom. It comes up into an orange with yellow across the top. Now the one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. That pink is much darker and more pronounced, and we see a little bit of the line in pink that I put down. We see the same orange and the same yellow, and it does not travel as far up the filter paper. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. Now I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it handles it fairly well. That extra fine most of the time stays in extra fine. It only spreads slightly in a couple areas. It makes me feel safe in a note-taking situation. Water is reactivating and pulling almost all of the ink off the paper, and in fact we start to see some of the white of the paper begin to come through along the top and very bottom edge, making me say that water is all that you would need to clean this out of your pen. Now the pen flush, that dark spot that's there was a transfer sloppily from a paper towel blotting up the pen flush. That's not from the ink. But pen flush did, basically everything that water did, a little bit more of it. But I'm staying with my opinion about water being all that we need. 1/3 bleach solution is completely removing it from the paper, even though we're not going to need it. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Robert Oster's Red Orange has a viscosity of 2.82, making it on the drier side of normal, but still normal. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Robert Oster's Red Orange has an average dry time of 10 seconds, making it a faster drying ink. Now, let's look at the writing samples. I picked this ink up in sample form. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairefontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and the shading is gorgeous. From red all the way down to orange. Orange up to red, back down to orange. Beautiful. The extra fine is a slightly darker tone with no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and lovely, lovely shading. Look at what's going on with over. Starts nice and light, gets dark, gets light again. The light to super dark. Lazy goes from dark to light, has dark bottom of the Z, super dark Y. Beautiful. 6 seconds to dry. The medium is a darker tone again with no feather, spread, halo sheen, and some very, very nice shading. It is mostly very dark, and then we get all these lighter tones throughout it. Like the bottom loop of the Q is much lighter. The R is much lighter than the rest of brown. Fox starts dark, gets light, gets very dark again. Over starts with a very dark, goes to light, into dark, into light, into dark, over and over again, shifting back and forth, and it is amazing. 9 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both show us plenty of color variation, and we got plenty of color variation. And the smear test, you could recover this if you smeared while you were writing. Tomoe River. No bleeding. Minor ghosting.
The 1.1 gives no feather, spread, halo sheen, and no shading, but this paper doesn't tend to bring shading across very much. The extra fine is a slightly darker tone than we got with the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and no shading here. Again, this paper tends to kill off a lot of the shading that inks can have. It took 10 seconds to dry. The medium is darker again with no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shading, 16 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both don't really show color variation. We didn't get any color variation. And the smear test, I don't think you could recover it. I don't. Rhodia, no bleeding. That's a spot from a page underneath. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and gorgeous, gorgeous camouflage-like shading all over it. Very dark to mid to light to very dark to light to dark to mid-tone to dark. Beautiful. And that was just in the word Robert. Nice, super nice stuff. The extra fine is a slightly darker tone with no feather, spread, halo sheen, and gorgeous camouflage-like shading all over it. Looking at Lazy, it goes from a mid-tone to a dark tone to lighter to dark to mid-tone to very dark, all in one word. Beautiful. Fox starts very dark, gets light, gets dark again. 7 seconds to dry. Now the medium becomes a much darker tone than we saw with the extra fine. We lose some of the shading with that darker tone. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and it does have some lovely, lovely shading. It's just going from the dark, and then it shows through some of those light areas, like the W into N of Brown, the F into O of Fox, the left side of the J in Jumps, the ZY in Lazy, all lighter tones, all really stand out gorgeous, and 11 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us some color variation. The medium doesn't show as much. What we see here is what we see up here, and the smear test, you could recover this if you smeared while you were writing. Black and red notebooks. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen. It has some spots of shading, just spots of shading. Like the R is a bit darker than the O, and then it gets a little darker on the B again. The top of the T is very light, so there's spots of shading. It's just not as much. The extra fine is about the same tone that I see with the 1.1. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and it has the same spots of shading throughout. Not tremendous amounts, but the K in quick is darker than the rest of the word. The B in brown is darker. The is a much darker word than over or the light of the brown up top. 6 seconds to dry. Medium becomes a much darker tone, much, much darker. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and on this paper, no shading. 8 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows us some color variation. It shows more than we actually got, but we do get it. The medium shows us none, and we didn't get any. In the smear test, you could recover this if you smeared while you were writing. Limon paper that's had a lot of trouble with inks. And it had a lot of trouble with this ink. It did best with the extra fine. It had the least amount of bleed spots that came through. Of all of the spots where it's bleeding very deep into the page, it does not bleed through the page. I just don't know that you get to really use the back of the page, but it does not ruin the page underneath. The 1.1 has spread. It has feather, no halo, no sheen, no shade. The extra fine has spread and no feathering. No halo, no sheen, and no shade. 5 seconds to dry. The medium has spread and feathering all over it. Tons of tiny little feathers all over the writing, but it bled through much more too. It has no halo, sheen, no shade. 7 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no color variation. We didn't expect it, we didn't get it. In the smear test, you could definitely recover if you smeared while you were writing. Strathmore calligraphy paper. It's a nice laid paper. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shade. It's a very nice light orange. The extra fine becomes a darker tone with no feather, spread, halo sheen, light shading throughout. Part of the Q is darker than the rest of Q. K is much darker than the rest of the word. Brown goes from dark to light. Fox goes light, medium, or sorry, dark, medium, light. Dark, medium, dark. Lazy starts dark and works light. So we do get some nice spots, but we get whole areas with none of it. None, no shading whatsoever. Like over gives none, dog gives none. 5 seconds to dry gives none. And it took 5 seconds to dry. The medium is a much darker tone. It has no feather, spread, halo sheen, no shading, 8 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows us color variation, and we did get a bunch of nice color variation up here. The medium shows us none, and we didn't get any. The extra fine, I believe you could recover if you smeared while you were writing, but the medium, I don't think you could recover it. That is all that I have for the writing sample.
Instead of finding inks that look like Robert Oster's Red Orange, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I wanted a dark black, but not the blackest of blacks with this, and I chose Diamine's Quartz Black. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Robert Oster's Red Orange? This is an amazingly great shading ink. The way it goes from orange into red in the writing is gorgeous. This is top notch as a shading orange to red ink. Beautiful. If you like orange inks and you like shading, this is an ink that you really should try out, at least as a sample. Thanks for watching.